Welcome to TPK 101, brought to you by Pear Studio. On this show, we talk about encounter design and how you can build better and more engaging encounters of different types for your games at home. I'm Goose, and I am joined by Peter Saloom of Pear Studio. Say hi, Pete.
Hello, everybody. I am Pete from Pear Studio, and it's good to be back after the holiday break.
Pete, what are we talking about today?
This evening, we are talking about optimizing shootout encounters in Savage Worlds, and there is a whole lot that falls under the umbrella term of shootouts because Savage Worlds covers so many genres.
First thing I think of when I think Savage Worlds and shootouts is I think of Deadlands, right?
Sure.
Deadlands, revolvers, shootouts in the middle of the street. But I also think of a game I ran in a sci-fi setting where players are having a shootout with laser rifles and pistols and what have you.
Yep, and everything in between. It could even be crossbows and slings. It can run the gamut.
Where do you think we should start when it comes to shootouts?
One thing is sort of just the fundamental understanding of Savage Worlds and how dangerous shooting is to characters and NPCs in the game system. When I run games at conventions where I know there's likely to be like a large amount of shooting violence, I tell people at the onset, this is quite a lethal system, and if you shoot someone with a gun, they are very likely going to die. And if you are shot with a gun, you're very likely going to die. And I like to get that out of the way early so that people kind of have their head in the right space going into the adventure where those encounters might take place. So that's important. Another piece is really understanding the shooting combat rules and how those are navigated by the GM, because if you're not pretty fluid with how those roll, I think it's really easy to get bogged down and have cumbersome, slow combat encounters, which are not fun and tend to eat up a bunch of time and not be as tense and dramatic as they otherwise could be.
Yeah, so when you think about shooting rules, there, like I said, there's a lot of things keeping track of. You, obviously, shooting is easy in a sense because all you need to hit is a 4, which is part of the reason why it's lethal, like you said. It's unlike melee attacks, you just have to hit their parry, you just have to hit 4. There's a lot of ways to kind of counteract that or make it even easier to get like extra bonuses or even do more damage because it's easier to shoot. You can do called shots to the head more easily, that kind of thing. And then, but on top of that, there's cover rules. There's illumination penalties for shooting that are definitely almost more important. There's range penalties. So there's a lot more, when it comes to shooting, it feels like there's a lot more variables to keep track of, a lot more modifiers to keep track of. But if you're more familiar with the system, it's going to be easier for you to keep track of that. Especially, as you said, I think earlier, is that if you're dealing with weapons with a high rate of fire, there's a lot even more options that you need to keep track of for penalties and bonuses and such.
Yeah, high rate of fire weapons, whether it be in modern or sci-fi or what have you, it can be a lot of fun because the players feel the excitement of grabbing 3 D8s if their shooting's a D8 plus their wild die and throwing all that down and trying to get hits. And that can be really, really fun. But at the same time, it can start to be a whole lot to keep track of in a short order of time. So again, it goes back to being comfortable with the rules and trying to navigate things efficiently. It sounds easy when you say, well, all you have to do is hit a 4. But when you start to add and subtract all the variability, like you mentioned, the cover, the unstable platform, the recoil of using high rate of fire weapons, the range, which people, I think, tend to sweep under the rug at times, and the modifiers that are associated with short, medium, and long range. And then on the other side of that coin, all the bonuses from edges and other abilities and things like that are conveyed upon the players. So there's quite a bit of kind of quick back of the napkin math that has to be done to keep things moving.
When it comes to the GM side, I'm going to give a little piece of advice, and that's to just create a cumulative modifier for the player. Don't try to add them all up to say, okay, between the lighting and the cut range and all this, I'm going to give you this modifier. If there's player modifiers that give them additional benefits, let them get those and deal with those on themselves. But when it comes to the modifiers that you are imposing onto the player, try and make it just make a quick ruling on what the total is. Or if you're able to come to the table with those modifiers ahead of time, that helps things a lot.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think be on the same page with your players on how they want to do that. Do they want to always be operating on a 4 and hear what their modifier is? Or do they want to hear the number they need to hit? That just depends on your play group and how you want to do that. I personally am always operating off the 4 and a modifier because it's just sort of universal and basic to me. But, just make sure everybody's on the same page so that things are moving quickly.
I'm on the same page. I when it comes to any advice I always give to GMs, is keep that target number 4, because that's going to give them your players some encouragement. And also, I feel like the game, generally speaking, wants you to work around that 4, more of a different target number that kind of confuses some of the wording of certain things, and that can confuse your players even more. Personally, I wouldn't be opposed to seeing a change to parry and toughness that was a modifier instead. But that's a future topic we can talk about some other day. But yeah, so the point being, though, is that there's a lot of different mechanics that you have to worry about, and it's helpful just to make a general ruling over a cumulative, comprehensive, I think it's the word that they use in the core rulebook, a comprehensive modifier to what they need to roll, and just telling them like, hey, this covers all of the bad things that I'm telling you about. Does not cover maybe if it's anything but the gun itself. Maybe the gun, if it has recoil, it's going to give additional penalties. Let your players deal with those, and in some sense, I think one of the things that even I see in our games is that when you are dealing with a bunch of modifiers, don't try to second guess your players and their modifiers. Let them just calculate it and just trust them that they got it right.
Oh yeah. In the heat of the battle is not the time to argue back and forth over what you think the interpretation of the details of that edge are. That's for afterwards. Try to keep things, like they say, fast, furious, fun in the moment, and then maybe recap after and say, I don't know if we did that in the spirit of how that edge was worded or what, you can figure that out after.
Yeah. Or even, hey, did you keep in mind that you have a penalty from your wounds? Those kind of things, which hopefully they are, and they're keep track of. They may have to remind them afterwards, but yeah, don't worry about quibbling over it during the combat. Try to keep it fast, furious, fun, and try to keep it going in the game. And that's coming from someone who I have quibbled over things in the past, and I need to start trying not to. So
it's good advice. It's good advice.
Yeah. That's kind of like the disclaimer for shootouts. There's going to be a lot of rules. Try to be familiar with it and try to make sure that you have a good understanding of it. Otherwise, if you don't, though, what are the other options? What can we do if you're in the middle of a shootout where there's going to be lots of gunfights and you don't feel super comfortable handling the situation?
That is a problem for you, but I guess there are some things that might be able to make it easier. First is if this encounter involves a lot of different people or beings with guns that are going to be fired, meaning there's a bunch of NPCs and a bunch of players, I would try to group NPCs if there are a large number of them, or resolve them in a more efficient way than individual shooting rolls for, let's just say, a dozen different extra level NPCs. I'm not saying this in terms of wildcards, but extra level NPCs. One way you could do that would be maybe incorporate just the quick encounter aspects of, group roles into the encounter for just those groups of NPCs, because that would take a large number of die rolls and a bunch of calculations and turn it into potentially two rolls or something like that. And then you could kind of quickly narrate the overall result based on those. That would keep things clean and allow the focus of your energy to be more on the players at the table rather than doing the math on the fictional NPCs.
Yeah, and that's something that, again, will depend on your play group. Some people really enjoy that very tactical change of scenery and stuff, and so maybe you want to spend a lot of time on your combat, and that's fine.
Those people will really have the shooting combat rules grokked, right, and it won't be any problem for them.
Yeah.
They'll love that, they'll enjoy that, and they'll get in there and do that as crunchy as they'd like to. And that's the thing about Savage Worlds is if you want to be really tactical and strategic in combat, you really can get way in there, but you don't need to.
Yeah, I'm in 2 different games a week. I have a Monday game that I play in and a Thursday game that I run. My Thursday players like more tactical combat. They like to do the combat. And then our GM over on our Monday game doesn't really enjoy playing all the extras. And so what she does is she just does, like you said, a group roll. Anything that they a bunch of extras do in a combat. She just does a group roll for them. So you roll their skill die and a wild die, and that's the whole group attacking and or they're fighting or shooting or whatever, and just kind of resolves all of those characters at once that way.
I think that's totally acceptable, totally fine, as long as it captures the spirit of what you want happening at your table and your players are having fun.
Okay, so let's say we're not just doing a bunch of extras. Let's say we have a big showdown. Maybe it's like the big boss fight for the posse inside of Deadwood, fighting off against the bandit leader and 3 of his lieutenants, and in the middle of the street. That's kind of combat we're going for. That's what I'm gonna lay down as like the premise here. What are we looking at? What is something that we need to do to ensure that this combat is engaging and fun, and I guess is fast, furious, and fun?
The first thing I would say, based on the premise you just hit us with, which is a middle of the street showdown gunfight, is cover is king. If you are standing up in the middle of the open street with a bunch of bullets flying back and forth, you're in trouble. And vice versa if somebody's standing in front of you. Think back to, if you like Westerns, and I hope you do if you're playing Deadlands, think back to the Westerns that you've watched, that you enjoy. Think about the people who are perched on the rooftop, hiding with the rifles, and the people behind the barrel by the alleyway, and all the other things that are going on, because open shootouts in the middle of the road are totally crazy and super deadly. The cover thing has to be a big part. One way to encourage your players to think about cover, if maybe they're not, is to use it against them with brutal effectiveness. Have your NPCs use 2 actions, take a multi-action, or maybe just use their move as a free action, depending on where they are, and get them into cover and have them start firing from cover. And all of a sudden, the PCs find themselves exposed, standing in the middle of the road, taking wounds. Things are immediately not going as planned. That'll get players to get to cover really quickly.
Yeah, and just so that we are clear on what cover does, in Savage Worlds there's 4 different levels of cover. You have light cover, which is a quarter of the target is obscured, medium cover, which is half the target is obscured, or the target is prone. So if you're prone, that also counts as cover, and that's medium cover. Heavy cover, 3/4 is obscured, and then near total cover, where the target is barely visible. So maybe it's like only a small point. And those penalties are -2, -4, -6, and then -8. Those penalties are very important because Savage Worlds in shooting, it's fairly easy to get a 4, but then if you have cover, that makes things a lot harder. It's like adding a parry bonus almost.
And all of a sudden, it's a whole new tactical thing. You feel you're safe behind that corner of that building, and maybe you've got heavy cover there, but it also kind of takes you out of the action and allows your enemy to circle the building and maybe, flank you from another side. There's all sorts of interesting things that begin to happen when people start to think tactically about where their character is in this encounter, rather than just, I've pulled out my revolver and I'm shooting, and whatever happens, happens. That can fall flat, and like I mentioned before, it usually ends pretty quick too.
Well, since you mentioned cover, I want to mention something that I mentioned in my sci-fi game where we did a shootout, and one of the things that was really important in that game was using cover. But also what ended up happening is like, players ideally should be using cover too. So hint to players, use cover. Just like the NPCs are using cover, you should use cover too. But one of the things that as a GM we can do is if the players are smart enough to use cover, which I hope they are, one of the things that often happens is that in order to, maybe they have to, jump up to, or get out of cover in order to fire their weapon, let's say. Usually I rule, like if you're doing near total cover, or if you're completely covered, if we want to say like they cannot see you, you cannot shoot back. You need to be able to expose yourself, usually at least I'd say up to at least heavy cover, maybe the quarter of your body, up on top of a barrel or whatever, firing away. You have to get up and do that. And sometimes what I'll have my NPCs do is I'll have them go on hold, hide behind the barrel, wait for the player to reveal themselves, and then try to interrupt their actions with one of those, with an interrupting roll.
Oh, now, that's devious.
It is. Yes. Now the one problem with that, as Peter kind of mentioned, is that it does introduce some extra rolls, because that is a free action that basically adds 2 more rolls to the game that could end up meaning nothing. So be careful about using that, because it can really slow things down if you're doing that all the time. If you're doing it with a lot of different characters, if it's going to be a big serious fight, and that's like one of this is like the thing that you're trying to do, and you're trying to be devious because your big bad is a devious person, then That's fine. But if we're trying to resolve this a little more quickly, you may want to shy away from trying to interrupt characters and they're in the middle of their actions when they've exposed themselves. 2 thoughts on there. Keep in mind the problems that could happen, but also it's a good little trick that you can try to use to catch players.
Another thing that needs to be considered pretty early on in a shootout scenario, Deadlands is no exception, is what are the sort of parameters of morale in this shootout? It's very rare that 2 sides, face off in open shootout and their psychology is that everyone is going to fight to the last man standing to settle this dispute. That's just usually not narratively the case. Narratively, in this case, there is a bandit. Maybe this bandit is being run out of this town that he's taken up in, and there's a sort of a point at which his henchmen have taken so much damage and so many of them have been defeated that the rest are going to kind of say, it's not worth it, I quit, and head for the hills. Or maybe there is some other extreme reason that they must hold this position to the last man. But that should be something that's determined by the GM when they're prepping the encounter, because it makes a big difference in how the likely resolution of this encounter, turns out. Morale is sort of an important thing to consider.
Yeah, it's really helpful to have like a set goal ahead of time. If you're like building this encounter out ahead of time, is to know at what point do people start retreating? At what point is this over?
Things that I frequently use in my notes, and I also included in published work, are notes on encounters that say, in this encounter, in the middle of the street in Deadwood, there are 6 bandit henchmen plus 1 for each PC playing. They will cut and run once 50% or more of them are defeated. I'll put in general rules of thumb that are kind of points where I think, okay, that's when that would trigger this next action. Sometimes it's not that they would flee, it's that they'll take some other more desperate action, so you can be creative about that as well. Once you've killed X amount of these or incapacitated X amount of these bandits, they're going to hole up in the safe in the bank. Just have those ideas in mind, unless you really intend to have it be we are going to roll this out until everyone on one side or the other or both is incapacitated.
And one of the things that I see a lot in some Pinnacle products in other adventures and stuff is that a lot of times the wild cards will state they'll state that they will retreat once they hit 1 wound. And they're positive, if I'm reading it, once they have 2 wounds and they have one more 3rd wound left, or it's the 4th wound is the only wound left, but their incapacitation wound. But either way, they specifically state in the books, like, hey, once they're down to 1 wound, they will run away. Some of the ones that are more likely to run away, they'll actually say the opposite. They'll say once they have taken a wound, they'll run away. Like, doesn't matter how many wounds. Once they take a wound, they're like, oh, this is actually dangerous, and they'll just check out. Yeah, those are different ways to address it. And you basically just have to think about, when it comes to wild cards, just put yourself in the mind of that wild card. It should be a more fleshed out character, and you should know at what point that particular character would cut and run.
Or in addition to the morale considerations, which we've now covered, there can also be other objectives in the shootout, other sort of victory conditions, which we've talked about in all of our other episodes as well. This could be a hostage situation. There could be innocent bystanders. There could be an item that needs retrieval and cannot be destroyed. There could be all sorts of situations other than kill them all as the objective. And those types of objectives will make PCs and the NPCs consider their shooting actions differently. If they know, for example, that the bandit leader has the daughter of the local sheriff hostage back there behind his barricade, they're probably going to think twice before just pumping full rate of fire barrage into that area, because they need to, rescue this character. Those are just objectives that should also be sort of defined as part of the whole mood and narrative of the encounter.
And one of the goals that I love in combats is some sort of dramatic task. So if you can incorporate a dramatic task into your shootout as well, that's just gravy on top of the whole thing.
Yeah, I love doing that. I don't remember exactly when the first time I did that was, but once I started doing that, it's now hard for me not to. It's so much fun.
I can tell you exactly what mine was, because it was a very high stakes, high tension shoot. Actually, it was a shootout. It was a shootout because it was also a sci-fi game. They were on a ship. It was a mining ship, and they were in disguise as mining workers, and they found a bomb on the ship that they had to defuse. And they had basically established they had like 5 rounds to defuse it. And while that was happening, there was people who found them, had found out that they had discovered it, and were shooting at them, trying to stop them from ruining their plan to sabotage the ship.
Right. And so now you have this decision. Am I working on the task this round, or am I covering for someone else who is and providing cover fire, or what am I doing? And the tension is notched way up.
Yeah. So any of there's like one person that's working on that, the other player still have a decision of like, do I help that person? Because maybe it's like a significant penalty. Maybe they need a raise there or two in order to have enough success tokens to not fail this. And the cost of failure here was death in this case. It was like, if you fail this, the game's over, campaign's over. So very high stakes in that regard.
Stakes are as high as they get. Yep. I had in one of the adventures that I wrote called the Icelian Hybrid, there is a dramatic task that has to be undertaken to render the ship safe and sort of space worthy at the same time that a sort of violent outburst is occurring. There's always a decision every round. There's this hesitation from the players as they're looking at how many success tokens they've got for the task versus how close are these enemies and what condition are we in. And they've got this whole calculation to get nervous and worked up about that, really keeps players on the edge of their seat. Yeah. There's one really big consideration that we haven't talked about yet in shootouts, especially in a Deadlands shootout, and that is the bullets. What do you do about ammunition? In your game and in your encounter? And this is something that there are a wide variety of perspectives on. And I think, many of them are valid, and it should be sort of discussed and understood, I think probably in your session 0 before you start playing, the way that you agree upon handling ammo and keeping track of ammo. My personal play style is the less bookkeeping I can have myself and players do on numbers of bullets and rounds, and this gun shoots this many at rate of 3, it shoots 10 bullets each, that type of stuff. If I can get that away from my game, I feel like I've made it faster and more fun.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up a setting rule here. So this is the book I'm looking at right now, is the Secret Files Section D. They have a really cool rule that I really enjoyed it when it comes to keeping track of ammunition, basically where you don't, unless you basically like critical fail. If you critical fail your shooting roll, then at that point, the idea is like you've run out of bullets at this point. Now that rule really depends on what kind of game you're going for. This is going for a very extreme, like tongue-in-cheek pulp style feel where they really don't want to talk about or worry about ammunition or at all. Whereas if you're doing a very gritty game where, one of the things that is gritty about it is keeping track of ammunition, that's going to really change the behavior.
I think that's a great way to do it. I've done it that way, although I wasn't aware it was a specific rule from Section D. I have done exactly that before. I've done other things where we've established sort of the overall ammunition situation before the start of a particular session or adventure. If you want the tension to be around, we don't have enough bullets to survive this, that can be a really cool tension driver for an encounter. We have to solve this quick because we're going to be besieged and we're going to run out of ammo. That can be really interesting if you make that work. To just have ammo tracking and sort of detailed round by round tracking of bullets in a way that isn't made to actually ratchet up the tension and increase the enjoyment of the encounter, to me is counterproductive. So whether you use the critical fail roll, whether you use just a general, there was a method we used where we just had like plenty of ammo. We had like medium amount of ammo and low on ammo sort of statuses, and that meant different things.
Mhm.
And so it meant like certain amount of rounds or something, rounds of combat, not rounds of ammunition, until you were going to fall to the next level. And so it kind of like acted as a play clock, I guess, in
Mhm.
terms of shooting, or a shot clock, I guess is what it would be. And so that can work as well. The big thing is make sure it's just understood. You don't want to have one player over here scratching off each bullet with a tick mark on their sheet, and the other person is full rate of fire, 10 bullets every round, and not having a care in the world, because it's sort of imbalanced.
And to be clear, for the rules I said about section file D, that what I said was not exactly what it is. There is other stuff about it that is a little bit more nuanced and I won't say complicated, but more nuanced. I just was pulling something out of my head. That's not the exact rule that they put in here. The rule they have in here is better than just what I said, just to make that a little bit clearer.
We won't hold you to the exact verbatim quote out of the book.
Yeah, well, I just don't want people to think like, oh, here's the rule, let's do that. Like, no. There's a better rule in here. Still go check it out.
Go get the book, read it, get the PDF, read it, and then you'll know.
Now, personally, I have not played in a game where I think we've had to keep too high track of it. One of the nice parts about Savage Worlds is that combat tends to go faster. It tends to be done in so many rounds. And because that happens, it usually means that keeping track of some ammo isn't as, hard to do than other games where maybe it's like, if you're going like 10 rounds, you're like, okay, knock that off. Okay. Because it's going to usually combat, I'd say, last no more than 5 rounds. We shouldn't have to worry about too much about ammo tracking, because there shouldn't be that much ammo to keep track of within 5 rounds.
It is supposed to be fast, furious fun. If you find yourself where you're narrating something that is an all day long siege, where, the players find themselves literally fighting for hours worth of game time, you might have to figure out when that ammo is going to run out. I got like kind of 2 more big ones. One is make the encounter dynamic in a way that doesn't have to do with the shooting, incorporate it into it. An example of that is this shootout is taking place in the main street of Deadwood, but maybe it's from 2 sides of the railroad track. And at some point the train passes through and creates a dynamic cover scenario or something like that. Or the shooting itself is loud and frightening and causes a stampede at the corral. A dozen horses run down the street in a panic through the middle of the encounter, causing perhaps potentially people to have to jump out of the way to avoid being trampled. Those are the types of things you can do to sort of enrich the encounter and make it a little more unique. I would feel that an encounter fell flat if it was, we walked up the street, the bad guys were on the other side of the street, we started shooting, they started shooting, they all fell down first, we won.
Anyways, I started blasting.
Right. Well, you can start blasting, but let's just have some other stuff happen as a result of that.
Is it? You can even have something like where I would put this in an early part of the round. I want to put this in the late part of the game. I put this early in, where shooting starts happening, and this is where things maybe it's a little bit too dark. I don't think it's that dark, and a kid gets frightened and wants to run towards his mom, but his mom is on the other side of the shootout, and he starts running through. And you have to be, if your characters are heroic, hopefully they're going to try to do something to make sure that kid doesn't get shot.
Classic shootout, innocent bystander trope.
There you go.
Ham it up. Yeah, definitely. Play those up. Those are the things that I believe, not as someone who developed Savage Worlds, but I believe Savage Worlds was developed to embrace those types of things. I would be all for stuff like that happening, where it throws a wrench into what seems like a straightforward thing and forces the players to get creative and really play their character, both their character's hindrances and all of their motivations. So yeah, who's going to be the hero there? Are they going to care at all? What's going to happen?
And to be clear, there is rules inside of Savage Worlds for innocent bystanders where an innocent bystander can get hit. So just be on the lookout for that. I think it happens more likely if you have a shotgun. So if you are having a shootout with a shotgun, it's more likely to happen.
Yeah, I don't want to quote the rule, but it's something about a 1.
Each skill die that's a 1 hits a random victim adjacent to or directly in the line of fire to the original target. Wild dice never hit innocent bystanders. A wild card must miss with his wild die with a rate of fire 1 to hit an innocent bystander. This means that sometimes it's easier to hit an adjacent victim than the original target. may not be entirely realistic, but it's simple, dramatic, and requires some care in tight tactical situations. And then for rate of fire 2+ guns or shotguns, each skill die is a 1 or a 2 hits a bystander.
Each skill die. Okay.
Because if you have a rate of fire 3 weapon and all 3 skill die are a 1 or 2, that will hit a innocent bystander if they're adjacent to them.
I interpret that differently than what you just said.
Oh, maybe okay, go ahead.
Because I'm reading that it is each skill die that rolls a 1 or a 2 hits a bystander.
Yes. Yeah. So
meaning you could hit 3 bystanders.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
I'm in agreement.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe I said it wrong and it wasn't as clear.
I think it's even worse than what you said.
Yeah, you're right. I may have said it not as correctly as I could have. Yeah. My intention was to say that if you roll 3 2s on a rate of fire 2 weapon, you will hit 3 bystanders. And
if you roll 1, 2, and the others are successes, you'll still hit a bystander.
And something that's clear that they put in this book here is that it's only for when it's supposed to be appropriately dramatic. Don't always use this rule as a GM. Only use it when it's appropriately dramatic for that to happen, especially when there's innocent bystanders or friends or allies right next to the person.
Yeah, this would be for crowded spaces where that would be a major thematic thing in the shootout. If the bandits are robbing a passenger train full of people, there's innocent bystanders everywhere running in the way. That's going to be a thing. If you're on the outskirts of town, the average bystander is going to get out of the way and not be involved in this. And it's going to be less likely for you to really need to use that.
As I say here, sometimes it's going to be easier to hit an innocent bystander than the original target. Don't your players use that to their advantage in a meta way. Like don't let your players
shut that down. Shut that down quickly.
Don't let players try to hit someone they do not actually want to hit in order to hit the person they actually mean to hit.
In order to hit the crowd of bandits.
Yeah, that's dumb. Don't let them do that. It's not going for the spirit of the game. And make sure that if you are using the innocent bystander rules, that you are making it clear to your players that you are using them. Because if not, then they might get upset at you. They say, "Wait, I wasn't even hitting him, and that's not realistic." It's like, I know, but we're using these rules. That just make sure it's clear that you're using the innocent bystander rules. I tend to almost always use them because we don't tend to run into them a whole lot. It doesn't usually happen a whole lot, but I think they are really neat and kind of make players think twice about what they're doing in certain situations.
Oh yeah, that'll get a heroic party to really reconsider what they're doing in a hurry once a bystander is hit. If they have the good of, the safety of others in mind, they're going to go like, oh, okay, we need to regroup and think of a new way to do this.
The environment.
Yeah, on top of just weird dynamic things happening, like I mentioned, environmental things, which we kind of touched on with lighting and things like that, but weather, it's not necessarily lighting, but it's vision, right? So if you're in a gunfight in a whiteout snowstorm, you're going to have some pretty substantial modifiers there, based on visibility. Moving platform, you're on the roof of the train from shooting from car to car, things like that.
One of the common tropes I think of is barrels of gunpowder
and dynamite.
Yeah, and dynamite. Yeah, exactly. Where it's like, hey, personally, I would allow if you're next to a barrel of dynamite or a barrel of gunpowder, and I think someone will say in the comments, hey, actually, shooting a barrel of gunpowder actually wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't actually explode. I'm not sure that's true.
It would. But it doesn't matter. It does not matter if it really would or would not.
Right. It doesn't matter. It's cool. Point being, and you can have your own version of that whenever kind of game you're playing. Maybe it's next to a fuel cell in some sort of sci-fi game,
right?
Or next to
an oil lamp.
Yeah, an oil lamp or a gas tank or whatever. Yep. Let that happen. Let it do. That's cool. Other things I also think of though when I think of shooting is things that can be shot to cause things to drop on top of people. When I think of a Wild West game, I would think of pulley system that's like trying to lift something up to put into a cart or whatever have you, and it's like really high up, and it's some reason those bad guys stepped underneath it and shooting that piece of rope to drop some stuff on these characters that are hiding behind cover. Like try to add some stuff to the environment to basically have other targets to shoot at that aren't just the bad guys.
The shooting skill is not just to be used for shooting to kill or injure your opponent. It is for all the skills involved in shooting a weapon. You can also use it to shoot and try to drive somebody to in a direction, right? You're not planning on shooting to hit this person at all. You're attempting to scare them back out of the way into cover, to provide cover, but your intention is not to actually hit them. It's to get away or something like that. All those options should be thought about and used if they seem like they're going to be particularly effective.
You can use shooting as a support role to help your allies. You can use and you can narrate how you're doing that exactly. You can use shooting as a test and try to scare somebody, distract them with a well-placed shot. And you can also use suppressive fire as well to kind of lay down some ground fire to make sure that you distract some people so that you're one of your other player characters or one of your NPCs, since we're playing as game masters, to get some of their characters to move to different locations to get a better vantage point.
That's a great idea. And I'll admit, I underutilize suppressive fire. It's pretty neat.
That could be a whole video on itself, is rules that are underutilized in Savage Worlds games.
Oh, there's so many. And when we talk about using a shooting role as a support or as a suppressive fire rather than as a just black and white, I am targeting my opponent. The last thing on my list is from the GM's perspective is to utilize taunts, tests, or intimidation, anything that can cause the PCs to become vulnerable, distracted, or I believe it is shaken on a raise, because that will show the PCs another vulnerability that they're being exposed to, and it's likely to encourage them, if they're not already aware of it, to do that themselves. If you can make it personal, like if you can add any emotional stakes for your PCs based on their development of their character and their backstory, that's unique to the particular GM in their campaign. But if there's anything you can do in the encounter that ties into that, obviously that will enrich the experience for the players at the table.
One of the fun things I've been trying to do more of is doing some more tactical things and using some of these options that we're talking about where we don't get to use them as much. One of the things I think it's really fun to do is to basically highlight some of these lesser used options as a game master to show how great they can be to our players. So if you really want if you feel like the players aren't getting enough of the game, trying to do it. And one of the things that you can use in a shootout that's specifically handy is the called shots mechanism. You can do a called shot in melee, but I think it's even easier to do with a shooting roll because your target number is only 4. And I don't just mean using called shots in order to do more damage to the head or to a area that's less armored. One of the things that if you're maybe you're a big bad evil guy or the antagonists or whatever you can call them, maybe they aren't intending to kill the players. Maybe they just want to disarm them. Well, you have them shoot their hand and knock the gun out of their hand in a way that just feels really BA, it feels really cool. Like, hey, like this guy's good. He just shot your gun out of your hand. Feel intimidated. Like that should be an edge. Like there should be an edge that's like if you succeed on disarming a player with a shooting roll, you get a free intimidation test on them with a +2 or something.
That seems more than reasonable to me.
I think it's sweet. It sounds awesome.
I feel I would be quite intimidated.
Yeah, we'll have to work on that little edge there. It might already exist in Deadlands for all I know.
I was going to say, they may have beat us to this.
Yeah. If not, guys, this is a really cool idea. One other mechanic that you should be aware of that you should think about using is the aim action, which lets you take your whole action to basically ignore 4 points of penalty, or if you don't have 4 points of penalty, you can just get a +2 to your roll instead. So you have 2 different ways of going about it, which is one of the reasons why it's important to have target number be a 4, because if you have 4 points of penalty, it negates 4 points of penalty. But if you don't have 4 points of penalty, it only gives you a +2. So
that's such a huge advantage. I mean, you have to give up a lot because you have to stay still and give up the rest of your action there. But the payoff can be huge. And every time I've used that against my player groups that are not aware of it, usually the very next round, one of the PCs says, yeah, I want to do that aim thing. and is doing that because they have it explained to him. I'll say, okay, he's just aiming. He's obviously sighting in on you, but that's what he's doing for this action. Then the next round will go by. Then he'll come back and he'll get this big modifier. And usually it will result in a successful attack. They immediately see the value in that.
And then the last thing, we kind of mentioned this already, is having your characters be prone to do their shooting. Usually we think about prone and we think about prone being a bad thing because it means that's really easy to do fighting attacks against you. Well,
Sure.
it makes it harder for people to shoot at you. In certain situations, like say you're on a balcony and you're prone on the balcony shooting in between the railings, you might have a decent amount of cover on top of the fact that you're prone.
Oh yeah, especially if you're up top and they're downstairs. Yeah, that's a big deal.
Just keep those like the smaller things in mind as well, to try to make your encounters a little more interactive, more engaging.
Just make sure when you do roll a successful shooting roll or a raise that you just go pew pew every time because it's always enjoyable.
Sound effects are important. Like voices are important. Sound effects are also important.
If you can't do a great accent, just do lots of gun noises.
So that's our advice on shootouts, whether it be for your Deadlands game or even for your sci-fi game or your modern day game. There's a lot of different options in Savage Worlds to use these kind of mechanics in order to make more fun and engaging combats. If you have an encounter you want us to take a look at, please send it our way. You can either message us on Facebook or Instagram or Discord. We're on the Discord communities.
Yeah, we'd love to get more voices involved in this conversation.
And we are very thankful for all the comments we've gotten on these conversations so far that have been helpful for people. We hope that this is helpful for you, and we hope that you have a fun next session and games and campaigns for all your Savage Worlds fun.
Thanks, everybody. See you on the next one.
May your dice always ace.
Nice. Got to get that in there.
Yeah, gotta get something. There are dice always ace or something like that.